Just imagine this scene. I envision him in a room. He's got his 12 hairy-legged disciples with him. Remember the crowd. You've got fishermen. You have a tax collector who took money from the fishermen. You have a zealot who hates the tax collector who took the money from the fisherman. And then you have a bunch of other guys who we'll never hear of again. Bartholomew, where did he go? And so you got all these different guys in this room, and they're men. And guys, you know what it's like when a bunch of men get into a room together, okay? We do it every Tuesday night. It's a lot of fun. Men, you're welcome to come and be a part of this. Tuesday night from 7:30 to about 9-ish. And we just sit in the back and talk and have a great time going through a book. But you can just imagine all these guys together. They've been together for maybe 3 years now. And they're wandering around. They're learning different things. They've argued, they have fought, they have gone through all the different man things that you'd go through as you're traveling together. Men do get cranky every now and then, but not too often. And so they're all together, and then Jesus says to them, as his parting words, this is his prayer for them, and he says to them, this is how you're going to know you're my disciples. I can always imagine going, hey, you're going to love one another. Boo. What about a superpower ring or a badge or a shirt? I was walking this last week, and I had my Superman shirt on, and someone said, hey, Superman. I went, what's up? And Superman's walking down the street. Why is he walking? I don't know. He should be flying, but I'm walking on the street. And so this is how you'll know you're my disciples. You're going to love each other. And can you just imagine them looking at each other going, yeah, there's got to be another way for that. There's got to be a different way for that. But this is the main gist of discipleship. Discipleship is, you don't know you're a disciple of Christ by how much Bible you can memorize. Okay, that's not the test. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say you know you're a disciple by the things you do not do. It doesn't say that either, does it? Or the things that you're going to do. It doesn't say that either, does it? You'll know that you're my disciple by how you love one another. Isn't that awesome? Affection. God always wants our affections. He wants our hearts. He doesn't want our hands only. He wants our hearts. How do you then love one another? How do we love one another? You know, in our little line underneath our church is Odessa Bible Church, love God, love others. It's a part of us. How do we love one another? I want to show you where James deals with this subject of loving one another in the book of James chapter 4. And it's the latter half of this chapter, and this command that Jesus gives us still stands today. He gave it to his disciples, but it applies to us today as well. We are to love one another. How does this work in the book of James? So if you have your Bible, I want you to turn to James chapter 4. And James's main theme throughout the book is what? Do you remember? Closing the gap between what you know and what you do. And James, as you've known by now, doesn't mince words. He kind of just says stuff, puts it out there, and says, this is how you are to close the gap between what you know and what you do. James chapter 4, 1 through 10, we talked about it last week. It's the getting rid of the strife. He gives us not just the reasons for the strife, but he says this is the cure for that strife. You are to submit yourself to God. You are to resist the devil. You are to draw near to God. You are to cleanse your hands and your heart from sin, and then you are to humble yourself in the presence of the Lord, and he will exalt you. That's chapter 4, 1 through 10. And then in this next section, he's going to talk about a battle that gets in the way of loving one another. It's not just a battle, it's a war. A war is comprised of several little battles. World War II had lots of different battles. This is a war against self. It's what's going on inside of my heart. If we're to love one another, if we were to walk close to the Lord, submitting ourselves to God and drawing near to him, we're going to have to engage in a war against self. In verses 11 through 12, he talks of the first battle of this war is the war of self-exaltation. We'll talk about that this morning. And then the next section that he talks about is the battle against self-reliance. That's 4:13 through 17. And then the last battle that he's going to talk about is the battle of self-centeredness. Notice the word self. I got that from Dr. Constable, who observed that in these passages here. It's all about self. And if we were to be honest with ourselves, we would think that the biggest thing that gets in the way of walking with the Lord is myself. It's me. It's what's going on inside. The Bible would call that natural man, that old man that's inside. We said it before, the Bible divides us up into three groups. Spiritual man, one who's come to faith in Christ, who's walking with the Lord. Carnal man, the one who's not walking with the Lord but knows Christ. And then natural man, the one who does not know Jesus at all. That natural man had habits that we have to fight off. The Bible would call that the old self. Got to put it away. In these three areas, James targets about that old self, that old aftertaste of how you used to be when you were without God and without hope. Self-exaltation, self-reliance, and self-centeredness have to be put away. James is going to talk about how to do that. Let me read this section for you. We can read it together. I want to read the whole thing, and then we'll just break this down into different battles. Starting in verse 11 of chapter 4. It says this, "Do not speak against one another, brethren. He who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but you are a judge of the law. There is only one lawgiver and one judge, the one who is able to save and to destroy. But who are you to destroy or to judge your neighbor? Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go and do such and such in the city, and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and also do this or do that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Therefore, to one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is sin. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries which are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments have become moth-eaten. Your gold and your silver have rusted, and there is rust, and their rust will be a witness against you, and will consume your flesh like fire. It is in the last days that you have stored up your treasure. Behold, the pay of the laborers who mowed your fields, and which has been withheld by you, cries out against you. And the outcry of those who did the harvesting has reached the ears of the Lord of the Sabaoth. You have lived luxuriously on the earth and led a life of wanton pleasure, and have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and put to death the righteous man. He does not resist you." These three battles, this battle of self-exaltation, the battle of self-reliance, and the battle of self-centeredness. We're not going to talk about them all this morning. There's too much to these battles. I want to spend the next couple of weeks doing that, of just looking at these little sections and battles of self-reliance, self-exaltation, and self-centeredness. They're very huge aspects of our life. When you look at those, you might start thinking, well, I'm going to be out of town for a month or so. I don't want to do this. Don't do that. Don't do that. In fact, imagine what life would be like if you won the battle of self-exaltation, of self-reliance, and self-centeredness. What would life look like for you? What if people around us won that battle and they were not self-exalting, self-reliant, and self-centered? What would life look like in your home if you had a group of people who lived under that one little roof of yours, who were not self-centered, who were not self-reliant, or self-exalting? They were others, God-exalting, God-reliant, and God-centered. What would that look like? Wouldn't that be cool? Now, don't you want to bring your friends? Whoever's not here today, you're going to bring them. That's the vision that James has for all of us. How can we become more God-centered, God-exalting, and God-reliant in everything that he has for us? How can we do that? How can we become what God has for us? If you can start winning or continue winning this war, it will either turn your life around or it will help you accelerate in your spiritual life and becoming all that God wants you to be. So don't go anywhere. Come right back here. And let's learn how to do this together, because this is the old nature. This is the old us that we're putting to death, as Paul would say in Romans 7. I do what I do not want to do. How do I not do that? Walk by the Spirit. How can we do that? Well, let's talk about self-exaltation. Notice the first part of this, the first battle, verses 11 through 12. That's all we're going to get through this morning. Verses 11 through 12, it says simply, "Do not speak against one another, brethren." What he's not referring to here is he's not referring to sin. He's not saying do not confront each other when you're in sin. Do not directly get involved in a brother or sister's life when they're doing something that is blatantly wrong. At our church, if you go through our Next Step class, we believe, and you've learned this, we believe that as a church, we need to step into a member's life when there's addiction. It could be addiction to pornography. It could be addiction to drugs. It could be addiction to alcohol. It's not Diet Coke, okay? Amen. All God, amen. It's not Sprite. It's not HGTV. We're talking about addiction that is damaging, okay? We'll step in. We'll step in when there's adultery. We believe that the church should step in and defend a marriage and what marriage is. So we'll step in and we'll get involved in if there's addiction, if there's adultery, and if there's abuse. Well, that's not what James is talking about. He's talking about other types of things. He's not talking about these areas in life that are blatant sin. What James is talking about is when we place ourselves above the law and consequently above another person, and we begin to nitpick their lives. We begin to judge. Well, they didn't do this right. They didn't do that right. They should have done this. I would have done that. We begin to nitpick at their heels. And if you can imagine, this was written to the first century Jews. They were familiar with this. You remember? The Pharisees were like this. There was the law against working on the Sabbath. And you would start thinking, well, what defines work? I don't know. And so what they would do to prevent you from breaking the law of the Sabbath is they would come up with a law and say you can only take so many steps on the Sabbath. Okay, well, I've already taken my 30 steps. I guess I can't take out the trash. Yes. And they would nitpick on everything. There was over 600 of these laws that were not necessarily in the Old Testament, but they would add to the laws, and then they would start picking on each other. Laws that weren't biblical, but were based on preference. And they would just start nipping at their heels. And there was this instant happening inside of the Old Testament of a hierarchy of those who kept the law and those who didn't. Well, they prayed this many times a day and they used this many words. Wow, they must be spiritual. Well, in order to pray, you have to go here. In order to be considered generous, you have to give this much. And there was all of these laws that they built around, and they began to nitpick each other. I believe that's what James is talking about. I believe he's not talking about the major ones like I just talked about, judging or confronting and dealing with sin. He's talking about preferences. He's talking about speaking against a brother and tripping him up. Not in the sense of, hey, how can I help you? But in the sense of, near, you did that. Ha, ha, ha. And now instantly you have a hierarchy of, I'm now looking down on you because you're not up here. James says, do not speak against a brother. Do not hold them in contempt or mock them in that way. Do not do that. When we hold a brother under our thumb, we put ourselves in a position of self-exaltation, that we're better or higher than. And we put them under our thumb, and we hold them to a standard that we couldn't even match. We couldn't even get that. And that's partly why we put them under our thumb. And he says you are not to do that. This is what natural man does, naturally. That's the old self. That's not the new self. The new self is supposed to put God above. Self-exaltation by way of judging or nitpicking elevates the nitpicker as an authority when he's really not. So how do you know if you're a nitpicker? I didn't say nose, I said nit. How do you know? How do you know you're a nitpicker? Well, let's think about 3 different things. As I was thinking about this last week, 3 different things that you know you might be a nitpicker. Now, I'm not talking to anybody. I'm just talking to all right? How do you know? And again, I had to live with this too, not just you. But how do you know you're a nitpicker, okay? How do you know? Well, the first attitude is this. It's a critical attitude. Critical attitude. This is somebody who's just waiting for you to make a mistake. You know? It's when you order a meal and you're just waiting for that waitress to mess that up. And when she does, bam, you're going to get her. Because you're just waiting for it. You're anticipating. You know it's going to happen, and you just can't wait to gripe about it. In fact, no matter what happens after that meal, it's going to be a terrible experience because she messed it up or he messed it up. And that's all you're going to remember about that. And you're looking for that critical moment. It's almost like you set the bar just high enough that the unexpecting person will miss the mark every single time. And you like it that way because it makes you feel a little bit higher. Husbands, you can do this to your wives. Wives, you can do this to your husbands. Where you set that bar just a little high and you just cross your arms and you can't wait to be critical. You'll find it. I promise you, you'll find it. A critical spirit. Somebody who will just look for anything and won't be happy with anything. It could be a waitress. You could be upset at the employee, an employer, a fellow driver. The cashier, the husband, the wife, the teacher, the student, or the child. You're looking for anybody. You just can't help yourself from being critical. Or a harsher way of saying that is judgmental. Brothers, do not speak against one another in that way. Oh, but wait a minute, they're not my brothers. They're not Christians. Come on now. Love one another. And if you have a critical spirit, you're going to be all by yourself because no one wants to be around a person who's hypercritical. Nobody. There's another one here, and this is somebody that's called the inspector. this person. You gladly point out another person's faults. You go looking for them. You watch a movie. It was a great movie, but there was that one part that wasn't realistic. And that's all you can remember about that one part that wasn't realistic. And my thought is, it's a movie. None of it's realistic, okay? I go to the movies to escape realistic, okay? I don't go there looking for, oh, that's plausible. Yeah, that could happen. None of this could happen, okay? They're all too perfect. They all say the right things. None of this could happen. That's why they take 1, take 2, take 3, take 40. None of them get it perfect. But you, as the inspector, have established yourself as the judge of what is real and what is right, and you're inspecting it. The book was great, but I would have ended it a different way. There was something that was missing in there. You remember that teacher you had in elementary school, or probably high school, college? I don't give out 100s. I don't give, no one gets 100. I've had that professor. And what they'll do in order to avoid giving out the 100, they go, you misused the semicolon. Who knows how to use a semicolon? They'll point that out. Or they'll go to the footnote and look at the footnote section and say, you didn't put the parens in the right spot. They call it the parens, not the parentheses. It's the parens. You didn't put the parens in the right spot, and so you got a 98. And I do the same thing. Poor little soul. My 98 is leaving this classroom smiling because it doesn't matter. But the inspector looks for all of those little things, all of them, and tries to find them. And that way they can mark it down. In fact, this last month when we were in Dallas, we got to go to the Rangers game. It was awesome. I don't know how my father-in-law stumbled on these, but he had tickets for 13 rows behind home plate. And we got there early. They don't even sell hot dogs down that low. You have to buy like sausage burgers. I mean, they don't sell the little stuff that I like to eat. I went to buy a hot dog. You had to walk far to get that. They want you to buy the high dollar items. And so we were sitting down there, and we got our hot dog, and this guy comes walking in. He was dressed very nicely, and he was probably in his late 20s, early 30s, and he had a backpack, and he sat down right in front of us. And I noticed on his belt was a badge that said Texas Rangers. Oh, he must, cool. We're sitting where the employees sit. Cool deal. This is awesome. So I'm sitting there. I notice he puts his bag. He gets his little drink. He pulls out his little candy bar. He's done this before. And he gets his stuff, and he pulls out his scorebook. And he starts writing the date down. I didn't want to interrupt him. I was just going to watch him. And he was taking score the whole game. He didn't get as excited when Tepish struck out another player. In fact, he didn't even move. He just went, throw it down. David Murphy hit a 2-run home run in the first. Okay? Melanie and I and James, my brother-in-law, yay! We're jumping up and down. He sat there. That's great. So-and-so would strike out. He's keeping score. Now, I'm sure he's at work, something like that. And he's working, but he's writing score. Nelson Cruz, bases loaded. He hits a grand slam. We're jumping up and down. Woo! You know what he did? He wrote down and he kept going. He didn't get up or excited. We think we went 11-1 or maybe 11-2. I don't know. But when the game was over, he got his little scorebook. He put it back in his backpack, and he popped up, and he just walked off. And I sat there wondering, going, I know he loves baseball. He works for the Texas Rangers. I mean, this is his life. But he didn't get enthusiastic about anything. In fact, I'm sure he marked down errors, and I'm sure that he marked down the good things. But I bet you the errors were highlighted. And there are people in life who go through life with a scorebook. And they're keeping score. They're keeping score on things, and so you'll have a critical attitude, a person with a critical attitude, and then you'll have the scorekeeper. And the scorekeepers are really frightening because the scorekeepers are the ones who are not going to tell you right away something's wrong, or are not going to be looking for something wrong. They're going to wait and ambush you a little bit later. They're going to come back in at practice and let you have it. And they're going to say, well, now that you've mentioned the errors, let me tell you what I've been keeping track of for the last several weeks. It's not just today, I'm sorry to tell you this, but it's been a trend for at least 6 weeks. And let me start back. Back in May, you said you did this, that, and the other. That's a scorekeeper. And that critical attitude, that inspector-type attitude, or that critical spirit, scorekeeper, is going to speak against a brother and keep them under the thumb, so that nothing improves and nothing gets better. It's very, very domineering. And it has as its standard as somebody who's actually better than everybody else. And it doesn't work. In fact, self-exaltation has many paths. You can pick one of these, but it has one destination, and that's destruction. You'll ruin everything. And James knows it right off the top. You'll ruin everything. If you're critical, if you're an inspector, if you're a scorekeeper, self-exaltation has many paths but one destination, and that's destruction. You'll ruin relationships, you'll ruin friendships, and you'll be all by yourself. Some of you are nodding your heads. You've lived with some of that, and it's destructive. Could be an overbearing parent, an overbearing teacher that can do that to you, and it destroys the person. James says, do not speak against one another. In fact, that will do nothing but destroy one another. You are to love one another in love, giving them what they need. But there is a cure for self-exaltation. It works every single time. And I love the cure. I need it, and you need it. We all need this cure. And it's in the book of James. If you look back at chapter 4, look at the verse 6. It says, but God is opposed to the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. This whole section is built on humility and God's grace. You want to get rid of those attitudes of being a critical spirit, of an inspector, or somebody who is a scorekeeper? Grace. You give grace. You give grace to all of those you come in contact with. In fact, notice this verse, it's Ephesians 5:1. It says this, be imitators of God. Well, God judges. No. God loves first. Be imitators of God. One of the strongest characteristics of our God is his graciousness towards us. While that we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. You want to get rid of those attitudes? Be an imitator of God. Extend grace to one another. Imitate God and who God is. Think of it this way. We're all like bank tellers. When you go to the bank and you want to withdraw money or you want to do some kind of transaction, does she give you money out of her resources? Does she say, well, hold on, Bob, let me check. I think I got enough to cover that. Yeah, here you go. Does she give her own money? No. She is the dispenser of somebody else's cash. She doesn't give her money. She gives the bank's money away in the right denominations. And that's really all that you are. When it comes to grace, you are a dispenser of God's grace. That's what we're called to be. I don't give out of my grace, because that puts me again in a lofty position. I give out of God's reservoir of grace. I give it to those who come in contact with. I'm going to assume a couple things. In fact, you often hear this phrase, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Have you all heard that phrase? I often kind of struggle with that. Doubt doesn't seem to be a very beneficial thing, does it to you? I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. In other words, one more misstep and I'm going to smack you because I'm keeping score and I'm inspecting and I'm going to let you know. How about this? I'm going to give you the benefit of grace because I need that. You need that. We all need the benefit of grace. And so you're going to bump into folks all of the time. You're going to give them the benefit of grace. In other words, I'm going to assume that you meant well. That's grace. I'm going to assume that you did not mean harm. I'm going to assume the best about you and you and you and you. I'm going to give you the benefit of the grace because I know that God is working inside of your heart. Extend the benefit of grace because there's no doubt that God is at work inside of your life. Now, I want you to do something. I want you to look around you and just say, I'm going to give the benefit of grace. Go ahead. Look to your left or to your right. I'm going to give you the benefit of grace. I'm going to give it. You might have to turn around and do it because there might not be anybody next to you, but I'm going to give you the benefit of grace. And if you just heard that, say thank you because you need it. Okay? You need it. And so do I. I'm going to give you the benefit of grace. That means if you mess up, it's okay. Because I messed up yesterday. Worse than you did, but I'm not telling. Okay? I need the benefit of grace. You need the benefit of grace. And it's not easy to do. We're going to extend the benefit of grace because there's no doubt that God is at work. God is at work in each individual person's life in this room to bring glory to himself. And when we judge one another, we diminish what God is doing inside of one another's lives. We must extend the benefit of grace. It works especially well when you go out to dinner. Do you know that might not be that waitress's or that waiter's or that cashier's only job? Several years ago, I was at Walgreens on Christmas Eve, which is where I usually go. On Christmas Eve, our kids are usually sick, so I go to Walgreens. And I was standing in line behind the lady as she was telling the guy standing next to her, I was eavesdropping, couldn't help it, about her day. She had already worked 12 hours that day. It was 9 o'clock at night. 12 hours that day as a waitress. Can you imagine working 12 hours as a waitress with a Christmas Eve crowd? These large families, big tabletops. Can you imagine that? And she said, I can't wait to get home to my kids. I haven't seen them all day. It's Christmas Eve, and it's 9 o'clock. I want to get home to them before they go to sleep. Can you just imagine? If you can just learn to see people that way, that behind them is a story, that's somebody's grandpa, that's somebody's grandma, that's somebody who's in front of you on the road, is somebody's relative, and maybe they're struggling with some issues. So before you honk, before you swerve, before you say something you shouldn't, that's a real life person in there. And besides, you got a sticker on the back of your car that says you go to Odessa Bible Church, and there's crosses and everything on that. And so before you do that, you might want to go, woo-hoo-ha, there's a real live person. And one of my favorite commercials on TV, whenever I see it, I stop the DVR. It's the Dow commercial where it says the human element. We're not just products. We're not just consumers. We're humans, and you have to be careful with the humans because the humans are eternal. Be careful with the humans. They're everywhere. You is one, and you need people to be careful with you because you need grace. Grace is the fuel that keeps the gears of transformation spinning. Without it, the church grinds to a halt real fast. I need a church that's filled with grace. I think I've got one. I love it because it's full of grace. I assume every Sunday when you walk through the doors, you're tired and you need grace. God's working in your heart and your life in some way, shape, or form. I don't care what you wear. I'm just glad you're here. It doesn't matter. You need God's grace. This is a place you can get it because we love you, we love God, and we want you to be the best you that you can possibly be. Grace is the fuel that keeps the church growing and keeps transformation spinning. It's got to be in place. Now, some of you are thinking, if you have that mindset of a critical spirit or an inspector or a scorekeeper, okay, well, preacher, that's great and all, but what happens when you have to say something? Anyone? Of course not. Anyone thinking, well, what happens when something has to be fixed? Let me give you some insight, okay? First of all, if you're going to have to say something to somebody at some point about something, maybe it's your child, maybe it's your wife, maybe it's your employees, maybe it's your husband, maybe it's somebody somewhere in your life where you're going to have to say something. A few things to keep in mind. Where's your heart in that? Where's your heart? And what I mean by that is, are you connected to that other person? Are you in a relationship with that other person? There must be a love there for them, a love for God and a love for that person and God's work in that person. Have you earned the right to confront that problem? Because if you're coming out of left field, that's not going to feel very good. That person might go, who are you? What are you to say that to me? In fact, remember what Proverbs says, Proverbs 27:6, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but deceitful are the kisses of an enemy. The wounds of a friend, friends can hurt you. And there's not a better wound than a wound that comes from a friend because you know them and you love them and they love you. And so when you have to confront whatever it is, how's your heart? Are you connected to that person? Do you have a right to say something to that person? Is there a love that's there that will be received well? Because I don't mind being wounded because I need to be corrected, but I need to know that I'm loved. I've got to know that. Otherwise, it's not going to go very well. And so are you connected? And then the next one is your words. Your words are powerful because they mean things. When you have to say something, make sure you choose your words very, very carefully. Carefully selected words that will correct, but also confirm and instill faith and hope in that person. That you're going to share words, but choose them right. Because if you choose the wrong ones, this might not go very well. Choose the right words at the right, and this is the last part, at the right time. Choose your words carefully, and your timing must be good. Solomon says there's a time for everything under the sun. There's a time to be critical. There's a time to be encouraging. There's a time to speak kindly. There's a time to speak loudly. Each person is different. And you've got to choose the right time. You've got to say it, the heart that's connected with the right words, and then choose the time that's right. Not in the heat of the moment. I promise you, in the heat of the moment is probably not a good time. You know, that moment when it's happening going, well, I bet you wish you should have done that differently. You messed that one up. That's probably not a good time. Maybe a little bit later would be the right time when the emotions settle down and you might be able to deal with the heart and the person. Because humans are fragile. They need grace. You gotta be careful. I've often wondered, as I like to watch baseball. So when I'm watching baseball and the pitcher just gave up a home run, and now it's the ninth inning, and the score has switched sides, and the other team's winning, and the manager is walking out to the mound. There's a reason why they walk so slow, is he's trying to figure out what he's going to say without totally destroying that pitcher. And so that manager is walking out there very slowly to the mound, and he is now going to talk to a pitcher who feels lower than the mound because he just gave up the run for his team. And so this manager is walking out to the mound. What is he going to say? Do you think he might say, well, now you've done it? Do you think he might say to that poor pitcher, well, if you're going to walk him, at least hit him? Good grief. Leave him a bruise. Maybe tomorrow night I'll be there. Or do you think he might say, give me the ball. Just give it to me. Give me the ball. Do you think he walks out and says it that way? Do you think he walks out with his hands and go, you knucklehead? What have we been teaching you to do for all? Do you think he says anything like that? Now, that might be going on in his heart. Okay, but do you think he says that? I'm certain that there's a lot of things that he might want to say, but the first thing he is not going to say is anything that's going to crush his spirit. And so, a couple things. First, notice the thing about the manager when he walks out there. What are they wearing? What are they wearing? They're wearing uniforms. Are they different uniforms? They're the same uniforms. What does that mean? They're on the same team. They're connected. They're both now losing. One's not on the bleachers. They're both losing. And so when he walks out there, he is instantly identified with the pitcher in the uniform. They're connected. Their hearts are connected. They will spend months together. There is a connection that's there. So when he walks out there in the midst of 42,000 screaming, unhappy fans, and that baseball player sees that manager walking out, he sees a guy who's on his team. Okay? There's a connecting point there. Second, the conversation I've noticed is usually brief. They're in the arena of winning baseball games, and it's not going well. Everyone else is screaming at him, but that pitcher knows my manager's on my side. And then he comes out there. It's a short conversation. The manager isn't going to go out there and condemn the pitcher, kick dirt on his shoes. He's not going to scream at the pitcher. He's going to walk out there. They're going to talk, but they are going to be very diplomatic. The pitcher already knows, doesn't he? He's the one who threw the ball and went, okay, he knows what just happened. He doesn't need to be retold at that moment what just happened. The manager needs the pitcher for the next outing. He might need that pitcher tomorrow. If he walks out there and humiliates him by using harsh words, or he might ruin the next outing. So whatever is said is going to have to be said briefly. And the third thing, now is not the time. We're playing baseball. We got to win. I'll deal with these issues later, but now is not the time. I'm going to choose my time later when it's just me and the pitcher and the pitching coach, and we'll talk. And we'll visit about what just happened and what to do next time. How to confront that issue next time. And as in baseball, so it is in life. There's a time to confront. There's a time. It's all there, but not in the heat of the moment. That's probably not the right time to correct. Maybe a little bit later. You get through, because what that person needs, who you're having to deal with, needs to know that you're connected. You're in it for them. You want them to do well. You want them to be the best them that they could possibly be. And to use the wrong words at the wrong time, ooh boy. And if you're not connected, it's not going to go very well at all. You've got to use the right words at the right time when you're already connected at the heart. Because there is a time when you're going to have to say something to someone about something. You have to just know how to approach it and how to say it. I tell Brooke from time to time, because she's learning about tone. Anybody else in here learned about tone? My mama taught me about tone very clearly, And so you can say, I tell Brooke, you can say anything you want to say. You really, really can. You can tell me anything you want to tell me. But you better choose your words carefully, and you better say it at the right time. And watch your tone. But you can say anything you want. It's okay. You can talk to me. But just be careful. Because if you say it wrong, you push the bull the wrong way, and you might get the horns. My dad used to say that to me, mess with the bull, boy, you're going to get the horn. Context was different, but it was the same idea. You can say whatever you want to say. You just got to choose your words. You got to connect your heart. You got to pick your timing. James is saying, do not judge one another. Don't hold each other under each other's thumbs. That's not an environment that encourages growth. What encourages growth is when you extend grace to one another. Not numerical growth, soul growth, transformation growth. When you say, I'm going to give you the benefit of grace, I'm going to give that to you. I'm going to assume the best. It's going to work out great. Were it not for grace, I can tell you where I would be. Can't you? I know where you would be too. And we all need it. Amen? So, when you go home today, give your spouse the benefit of grace. Give your child the benefit of grace. They're going to mess that up. It's okay. It's all right. You'll have to pay for it, but it's okay. We'll get through that together. You broke the window? It's all right. Get your checkbook out, son. You're going to need it. Give me the piggy bank. It's all right. I'm going to give you the benefit of grace. Give me the benefit of grace. Look to your left and right. I'm going to give you the benefit of grace because that is what we all need. Notice this last verse. It says this. This is Colossians. It'll come there. It says this. Let your speech always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person. Isn't that a great word? Seasoned with grace. Just a little bit of salt. Too much salt ruins the food. Not enough salt, not good enough. Just enough to keep it seasoned and delightful to all those who enjoy.